Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to, I think we're on episode 10 of Might Help, Can't Hurt. Conversations with leaders, doers, and friends. And today I am conversing with all three. Michael Bungay Stanier from MBS.works. And Michael, I was trying to think how we first met. My memory of it is either you sent me or I came across a copy of Get Unstuck and Get Going.
It was probably me sucking up to you. But Get Unstuck and Get Going is 15 years old now. So okay. I think, when I put that out, I was even less well-known than I am now. So I was like, I need to approach influential, famous, charismatic, sexy people and go, can I get this book in your hand? So I was like, okay, who else other than Michael Neal do I send this to? And I'm like, well, after Michael Neal, there's really nobody.
Yeah,
I think we've known each other for 15 years, close to it.
Wow, that is cool. That's very cool. And no, his hair has not always looked like that.
It's been better. It's been worse. You could go either way.
No, I'm not saying that. No, one of the reasons that I was excited to have you on, well, actually it's twofold. So let me get my daughter's question out of the way first. Because I mentioned when I was talking to her that you had something to do with stuffed crust pizza. And she asked what, and I was like, I can't remember. What's the stuffed crust pizza story?
When I finally finished university, and I was living in England at the time, and I was like, what do I do? I've literally spent 8 years in university. I have a master's degree, I have a law degree, and I have no clue what I need to do with my life.
Right.
And I stumbled onto this company that was an innovation company. It's all about new product development. It's all about innovation and creativity. And I loved them in part because they were determined to not do business as usual.
Right.
To the extent that when they started, sending out invoices to their clients, they do hieroglyphics rather than invoice numbers because they're like, no, we're going to break every rule.
Right.
And as a result of working for that company, I played a very small role in helping to invent stuffed crust pizza for Pizza Hut. And in fact, it was a crossroads moment for me, Michael, because I'm like, in the world of new product development, that becomes something that you can boast about. But in terms of my life, if I said to myself, that was it, I peaked in my mid-20s with stuffed crust pizza, I'm like, that's a terrible life. I don't want that life. So that's actually a key catalyst to move me out of that world and kind of start the journey to end up where I am today.
Yeah. No, so this was the other part that, I love the creativity you bring to everything I've seen you do over the years and how it's just kept evolving and evolving and evolving. And how are you doing with our little creative instigator at the moment? Shaking normal.
It is, I think it's a wiring actually, Michael, that tends to make me want to zig when others zag. Right. In part because I realized early on, and I don't know why I understood this, but there's a way that being different is actually powerful. Being different is how you stand out from the crowd. There's always a lot of noise. Difference and a commitment to going different means that you, first of all, look at public opinion and go, is that true?
Right.
Is that right? And then go, how do I stand apart from that so that I'm provocative and that I'm interesting? I heard a talk the other day about what it takes to start a movement.
Yeah.
And he said, you can start a movement without a God, but you need to have a devil. And that's really interesting, because it's like, to start a movement, you need to stand against something.
Right.
And there is something powerful about doing that. And then, of course, this little pandemic we've got is a great accelerator to go, all right, what do I know to be true?
Yeah.
And what have I made up as to be necessary? And, I started a company called Box of Crayons, which is about broadly helping organizations move from advice-driven to curiosity-led and teaching coaching skills. They were already in the process of pivoting and rethinking about how they wanted to show up in the world. So this has just been a great accelerator of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, what kinds of things, I was going to ask, I was thinking about this just before and I caught myself because I was going to ask, what kind of advice are you giving to your business clients? And I figured the guy who wrote The Advice Trap and teaches people about not giving advice probably isn't giving them advice. What kind of things are they asking for advice that you're not giving them on?
Well, yeah, I mean, to set the record straight, I'm actually pro advice. That's not the advice trap. Advice is, necessary. I mean, this is a form of advice giving, right? This very conversation. What I'm trying to shift people away is having advice giving as their default response to everything that shows up, which is actually what lots of us bump up against. I mean, it's a really good question, Michael. I'm tempted to turn the tables on you as well. But for me, I've got two things that I'm saying to people. The first is to recognize that people respond to the strongest signal in the room. Yeah. So part of your job is to understand what signal you want to be, and then to be it so that it creates that mirror neuron effect, and people respond and kind of their brain kind of aligns with how you're showing up. So part of what I'm not sure if I'm giving this advice or just trying to practice it, is to say, look, I want to be a beacon for some form of positive, not optimism exactly, but kind of grounded realism. You don't want to fall into the so-called, the Stockdale paradox where all the optimists die early.
Yeah.
You want to be grounded in the reality of the situation. And you also want to know that this too will pass. And you want to keep trying to show up as the best version of yourself rather than the reactive version, which is what your little amygdala wants you to do, which is like to panic and to kind of flap around and move into fight or flight or faint or whatever it might be. So there's one principle, which is like, how do I...
choice. Now, I just want to flag this. So we don't have to either fight or fly. We can faint as well.
That's what I heard. I mean, I heard...
No, I like that. I like having more choices, not less.
Yeah, it's like fight or flight. I'm just going to go, I'm just going to pretend I'm dead here and lie on the ground and hope that people move on by.
See that. Yeah.
Then for me, Michael, the other piece is principled rather than specific. Because specific advice is almost always useless, particularly if I'm talking to people I don't even know. Yeah. But I've been thinking to myself, look, I want to try and walk a path between the light and the dark. Because if you go into the dark, and, that's a place of anxiety and flapping around and, let's call it fight, that not only winds you up and diminishes your capacity to be the best version of yourself, but it diminishes those around you as well. You kind of pull others into that. Yeah. And if you go too far into the light and you're like, oh, it's not even happening, or it is happening, but I'm pivoting and it's amazing. Not only are you a little tone deaf to those around you who are struggling and finding it difficult. Yeah. And you're naively optimistic, or you're naively dangerous, and you're like, oh, I'll pretend it won't happen, and therefore I'll unflatten the curve. Yeah. So I go, all right, Michael, what's the path between the light and the dark? How do I stay grounded in the realism of the situation and remain certain that this too will pass? Right. And what I've been saying to people is like, we all get to navigate our own path between our own light and our own dark. Yeah. But perhaps that principle is a useful way of thinking through this.
Right. And are you finding with your clients, so we've got an echo all of a sudden appearing here, but are you finding that they are mostly terrified, mostly excited, mostly like, is there a trend in how the businesses you're working with are responding to this, or internally, externally?
It varies. I wouldn't say anybody's paralyzed with fear, but there's a different way people are thinking about responding to the opportunity. I mean, there's just some sectors and some industries that just it's brutal. I mean, who would want to run an airline at a time like this? I mean, it just isn't a good way to run an airline right now. Anything that's going to happen is you're going to lay off hundreds of thousands of people. Yeah, it is brutal, and there's not like you can think your way out of it or strategize your way out of it. It's like, no, your industry is taking a hit. Yeah, and it's a fair question to ask: are you going to survive this or not? And so that's what they're asking, and they're trying to figure out, how do we manage this so that we survive? there are other people who can see the opportunity in this, who go, this is actually, because of where we're set up, a chance for us to winnow the field, a chance for us maybe to purchase or make acquisitions, a chance for us to differentiate ourselves from our competition. So I do think there are some people who win from this situation, but at the moment, it's a little bit difficult to look beyond the kind of immediate carnage and just that kind of so many people are just going, I'm just trying to think about how we get the next payroll sorted out.
Well, now what I've been finding really interesting is the number of people I'm working with who are aware that while they are focused down, like their timeline has shrunk dramatically in terms of how far ahead they're looking, that the kinds of things they're doing to make things okay now are actually setting them up for a very profitable future. And that surprised me. Like that has been the dominant, not the exception.
Yeah. And I'm seeing that as well. You know, I do think that in some ways what this creates is the end of strategic planning because, you know, whatever your 5-year plan was, that's not your 5-year plan anymore because everything's changed. And this whole idea of people understanding that our organizations are and exist within complex situations and that it's emergent, and that really the way we work is we make a short-term decision and we sprint to where we think that's going to be, and then we have to stop and look around going, now what? Now how do we adapt? How do we adjust? How do we think differently? And to find the way that this is a big topic, Michael. I could soapbox about this for about 5.5 hours.
Box for 5.5 minutes. Like I know, because I think it's an incredibly relevant topic. Like we've had, even on this little platform, we've had conversations about the future of the health, but this is the first time I've had a chance to talk to somebody really about the future of the economy. Yeah.
Well, you know, there's a book that I've been really influenced by recently. It's by a guy called Aaron Dignan. It's based out in Colorado. His firm is called The Ready. And the book is called Brave New Work. And here's what I love about it, Michael. It has at its heart a kind of twin sun. And the twin suns, one is like, how do we build organizations that are people positive, that keep remembering and keep centering our organizations around the people that are there? Yeah. Rather than, I think you could say that in many organizations, there's a trend towards dehumanizing them because, you know, their organizations are set up to kind of be a bit machine-like.
Yeah.
And then the other pole, if you want to go for that metaphor, is complexity conscious, which is just to say, you know, setting up overly elaborate structures and systems and rules and bureaucracy actually tends to smother good things, whether that be innovation or autonomy or whatever it might be, and is naive because that's actually not how complex situations work. And I do think that there's been edge cases about organizations that have been thinking about being people positive and complexity conscious for a while. I think this piece here starts breaking some of the old ways of doing business where like it really doesn't work. And if you weren't sure about that before, now it's obvious. And also legacy systems are now failing. And as much pain as that causes in the moment, when your legacy system has failed, it clears the field for you thinking about, well, what do we build in its place?
Right. So you know, there's a bunch of threads there because there's the thread of industry specific.
Yeah.
There's the thread of time frame specific, like part of which being nobody knows what the time frame they're planning for is.
That's right.
You know, because it really isn't an obvious thing that, oh, we'll be back to something resembling what we used to know in a month or 7 months or ever.
Yeah, exactly.
And do you think that I mean, this is a stupid question, but I'm in, right? Like
that's how we became masterful coaches, Michael, is our gift for stupid questions.
Are we going to be okay?
Yeah.
I mean, what's your sense? Is your sense that this is one of those, and again, I know you're walking a line between light and dark.
Yeah.
But is your personal sense we're talking about a complete fresh start, or that this is an evolution?
I don't know, Michael. I have I have a toggle that switches between optimist and pessimist.
Yeah.
And it's pretty flexible at the moment. It flips both ways.
Right.
And what's really hard to guess is all the unintended consequences. It's like you can kind of guess a little bit that's going to happen, but it's really hard to see what other dominoes fall when that happens. And then when that happens, what dominoes fall after that. And, there are scary things. I mean, I'm up in Canada. We look down on the States and we go,
sense of the word.
Well, this is a country divided, and it's also a country with a lot of guns and a willingness to use them in a way that you just don't get anywhere else in the world. Yeah. And you have 30 million people signed on to unemployment last week, and you have divisions on racial grounds and wealth grounds. And, I look down on the States and I go, so what does civil unrest look like in the US? And where does, and what's the US-Canadian border like exactly? And how strong is it exactly?
I don't think anyone's building a wall. I think.
Yeah, believe me, there's some Canadians who are going, is now the time to build the wall? I think we should build a wall at this stage.
Yeah.
So, it's hard to know whether that stuff happens or not.
Yeah. So what for you in like personally in your business?
Yeah.
To the extent that you can share, like what adaptations are you making? What are you doing differently?
So I've got two businesses. So it all depends on where you look. There's a company that I founded 20 years ago called Box of Crayons. Yeah. And I stepped away from being the CEO of that about 9 months ago, and Shannon took it on. And quite frankly, thank God, because she is such a good CEO compared to anybody, but particularly compared to me, because I was a classic accidental CEO, which is like, how did I end up running this thing with 20 employees and these obligations? I don't know what I'm doing, and it's not playing to my strengths. So she is navigating Box of Crayons through this. I'm doing my very best to be a founder who doesn't scupper my CEO's chances by meddling and being a nightmare. And we had already, Box of Crayons is already moving towards delivering programs and coaching skills beyond the classroom. And this has accelerated what we were already doing, and has accelerated how we think about ourselves in the positioning in the market and the like. So yeah, it's not a radical change. It's an accelerated change on what's already going on.
Yeah.
Now, when I stepped away from being the CEO, Michael, I was like, well, now what? Who am I when I take off the cloak of
the stuffed crust pizza guy, Michael?
Exactly. I've already had to shed that identity. And now I've got this Box of Crayons identity, which I'm also putting aside. Who am I when I finally grow up? And I had this new book come out on February the 29th, The Advice Trap, and it coincided with me doing a TEDx talk on the same day. And I was working really hard to both of those deadlines. And then I hit February the 29th and I kind of collapsed over the finish line and went, I'm exhausted. And I always knew that I'd be in a process of disassembly before trying to figure myself out. Because, I'm now old enough that I know how to do a bunch of stuff, and it's easy enough to fill up my time. I'm just trying to figure out what's the most interesting thing to do that is of the most service.
Right.
And what I've been doing is I've just been, I'll see if I can actually grab this.
Yeah.
I've got this file right here. It's called the random idea file.
Okay.
You can see it's pretty thick because every time something occurs to me, to manage my own compulsion to put it into action, because of course, as soon as I think of it, I'm like, it's a genius idea. This is the idea.
Resource.
It's like stuffed crust pizza, but better, right? I'm like, okay, you got to lessen its sting. So I keep writing it down and throwing in there. I'm pretty sure that when I look at it in a month or 2 months' time, it'll be the same idea I've written out 48 times because I keep having the same damn idea. But, this pandemic has been an accelerant to me dissolving myself. And I've got the luxury of not needing to immediately fill in the blank around. So now this is what I do. So I'm exploring, I'm hanging out with friends on LinkedIn Live or whatever and Facebook Live and going, I don't know, working it out, trying to get people to buy my book.
I did give myself an easy out by calling the show Might Help, Can't Hurt.
Yeah, exactly. Although you never know. When I see can't hurt, I'm like, that sounds like a challenge. But I'll try not to do any damage.
I appreciate it. Now, the other thing that I was thinking of when I was thinking that we were going to get a chance to talk was, I think I'm going to say 2011, but I might be plucking that out of nowhere. You wrote a book called End Malaria Now.
That's right, End Malaria, and it was 2011. That's a great memory.
So then, I mean, malaria being one of the longest running pandemics on the globe, was there anything that you learned in studying and working on that feels relevant to this situation? Are there, are all pandemics have certain things that you can see?
Well, it's interesting. I'll tell you how I came to that. I just published in 2010 a book called Do More Great Work.
Yeah.
And great work, in a summary, is saying, look, it's the work that has more impact and the work that has more meaning. And one of the things I talk about in the middle of the book is like, do a great work project, make it time defined, but actually commit to something and say, this is it. I'm going to do a great work project. So I've actually giving dedicated time and focus and attention and resource to work that matters to me. And then in a rare moment of self-honesty, I'm like, I should probably follow my own advice on this and do a great work project.
I keep meaning to try that.
I know.
I mean, is it any good? I guess you came on the other side.
Well, that saying, take my advice, I'm not using it. Well, I'm like, okay, let me use my own advice here. So I went around the corner to a coffee shop and I went, what have I got? What are my assets? And I'm like, okay, I know how to get a book done. I've kind of figured that out, and I've got contacts. And I realized I was pretty good at gathering weak ties, people I knew a little bit, and kind of getting them involved.
Yeah.
And I also have what a friend of mine calls my Messiah complex, which is like, I'm trying to save the world.
Right.
So what I did is I looked at the UN's millennial goals and said, which of these offers the cheapest unit of change? And when I went through them all, eradicating malaria, which you could contribute to by buying a $10 mosquito net, was like, oh, this is interesting. So for $10, you're not just contributing to a movement, you're buying a mosquito net. Right. So my original idea was buy a book, buy a net. And every book would contribute a net. And then I went to my publisher and I was like, hey, what do you think of this? And they're like, oh, yeah, maybe. And it was a nightmare because it just was hugely complex. And as you know from publishing, it's like it takes 6 months for any money to show up anywhere if you're lucky. And it's impossible to track because it's a 17th century.
Different. Yeah.
But then Amazon came along, and then Seth Godin had a year where he published books. Right. He was like, I'm gonna publish 10 books in a year. And so I took the idea, which had been on the sidelines, and pitched it to Seth. And he's like, yeah, we can do this. And we set up a partnership with Amazon, which meant all the money from the sales of the book, not just the profit, but all of the money went to Malaria No More. So the book hit, I think it certainly hit number 2, and it might have hit number 1 on Amazon for a brief moment. It raised somewhere around $400,000 in terms of money to end Malaria No More. And it was a collection of people writing about great work, but the money goes to Malaria No More. Yeah. So what it taught me was it's kind of an early version of virtual collaboration, because, this is me roping people in and saying, write a short article, and then me trying to edit it and trying to partner with Amazon. And what it taught me was how willing people are to be part of something if you can make it fast and easy for them.
Right.
And so it didn't teach me much about pandemics, because I know a little bit about malaria, but I don't know a lot.
Right.
It was mostly about this collaborative piece going, this is a project that will do good in the world, that plays to my strengths, that I'll be proud of, that I can boast about in 10 years' time, because it truly is. It's one of the things I'm really proud of.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's it's so interesting, because I didn't even think of it in that light until I was doing one of these with Robert Holden, and he talked about the 10 current pandemics, malaria being one of them, and I hadn't.
That's interesting.
Reading about it, but it was
the news with malaria just trends towards the good. It is getting less and less. They realize it's not nets alone doesn't do it, but there's a complex mixture of strategies that it's doing a really good job at slowly eradicating malaria. It's one of those key global plagues.
Now, do you have a design background or just a design eye? Because everything, what I'm thinking of, like, I remember that book with the black cover.
That's right.
And I remember, part of why I fell in love with your first book, the Get Unstuck and Get Going, was just, it's so it's divided like almost like a children's book, where there are three tabs with different kinds of ideas, and even do great work, which is closer to a conventional book, is still pretty interesting the way you put it together.
I mean, you could argue that working in that innovation company was a fast training in the basics of design, because we'd have to mock up prototypes for the people we were showing ideas to, and you need a degree of elegance around that.
Yeah.
But I've kind of always been a dabbler. I mean, one of my cherished early books was a book on different fonts, and I would trace out Gothic fonts and do headings like that, because I just like the way stuff looks like that. So I have a strong design opinion, and I think it's really helpful, because there is this slew of content in the world at the moment. I mean, there's this overwhelming amount of stuff, and design forces elegance and allows you to stand out from the crowd. And it also allows people to consume what you are offering in a way that is different and feels different. And so I think without design, you become noise. And with design, you have a chance of becoming signal.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm thinking, did I ever do that? But actually, the one thing in the space within, and it was a battle, but not only did I get them to use my cartoons, which is pretty impressive because I can't draw. So some of them are really my friend David's cartoons, that he made them worse so they'd look more like mine.
Nice.
But also that there was one point in the book where I really wanted a blank page. Like I wanted it to look like something hadn't been printed. And that was a battle and a half, but boy, does it work.
Totally. And that's, I'm sure it's not the case universally, but if you work with a traditional editor, they've got this traditional way of thinking about books because they love books. And, when I'm writing a book, for instance, one of my key principles is, and it's a design principle, which is what's the shortest book I can write that is still useful?
Yeah.
And that the brutality of cutting your own words and going, right, there's this awesome introduction of 30 pages and I'm just going to cut it out and abandon it so I can get to the more interesting things fast. Because I know that when somebody's reading a book, all they are looking to do is find the opportunity to stop reading the book. So they've got so many other things that they could do. So I have to design an experience that just pulls people through the book and makes it really hard for them to put it down. And that is not about, it's partly the quality of your writing, it's partly the quality of your ideas. But if your design doesn't support that, you're nowhere.
Well, one of the first experiences I had, because I worked as a developmental editor on a bunch of books, and one of the books so my last guest on this show was Paul McKenna. And I
So
got to
good.
be elemental editor on his book, I Can Make You Thin. In the first version, it was about 17,000 words. And back then, everything was 60,000 plus. Really,
Right.
80,000 was what they were looking for.
Yeah.
And he got a letter back from someone at the publishing house, who I'm sure isn't there anymore, saying, "We received your pamphlet. We look forward to receiving the rest of the book in due course." And it was this kind of moment of panic. And he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Look, you can make it longer, but you're not going to make it better."
Yeah, exactly.
And so literally,
and it's literally a book on I Can Make It Thin. So having an overstuffed book is ridiculous.
One line to the book. We added
Yeah.
literally the only change we made was we added an opening sentence, and I don't think it's in there anymore because the book got longer as future editions came out because it sold 7 million copies. But it added the first sentence. "This may be the thinnest book on weight loss that you've ever read. Because I think you'll agree, thin is good, and it's what's inside that really counts."
That's perfect.
Put the exact same book back.
Yeah.
And it changed the publishing industry in the UK. I mean, literally,
that's
it did
brilliant.
that well that then everyone was like, "Well, we need it shorter."
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I love that you've had him as a guest. His stuff is so good.
Yeah.
You know, I saw his live show in New York, and then saw him again at the TED conference, and he is a genius. He is like an evil genius, but in a good way. I mean, he's really so clever.
Actually, I think he might quite like an evil genius, but in a good way. Actually, I think I may have almost used those words when we were talking. My wife always said, "Look, I know he probably wants to take over the world, but if somebody's going to take over the world, it may as well be him."
I know, exactly. Exactly, because even if he's taking over the world, everybody will go, "Yeah, that's what we wanted him to do."
Which is actually probably a secret of leadership. We just snuck in there.
Exactly.
What's your favorite quarantine distraction?
Well, it's twofold. I think one of them is my wife, who is a really great cook. Like, I'm an average cook. Like, I can follow a recipe, but my wife is a terrific cook. And a year ago, she became vegan, and I was, mourning the passing of assorted foodstuffs in my life. But I've just had the pleasure of her going, "No, I'm gonna nail this vegan cooking stuff." And it's such a good time to be a vegan. I mean, there's just never been a better time to be a vegan on this world in terms of what you can get, in terms of spices and all sorts of stuff. So that's a good distraction.
Yeah.
And then for me also, I love making cocktails. So I'm like, I don't know if you've seen the...
I love drinking cocktails. Michael!
I know, exactly. So Stanley Tucci, the wonderful actor, has this great viral thing about how to make a... I forgot the name of his drink, but a classic Italian cocktail.
Right.
And you see him making it. And I'm like, there's something just so elegant about a great cocktail.
Yeah.
So for my wife, she's like an aviation, which is 2 shots gin, 3/4 of a shot lemon juice, half a shot of maraschino liqueur, and a tiny bit of eau de Villette. And it's beautiful. It's got this pale gray, purple, violet feel to it with a couple of cherries. Brilliant. And I make a pretty good aviation now.
Well, you're on, because Nina makes one as well. So
very nice.
We'll compare notes going forward. Michael, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
An absolute delight to see you again, and I'm glad to hear you're still doing and thinking and creating.
I hope it's helped a little bit and hurt not at all.
There you go. Thanks, everybody.